Okay, mute and stop video.
I'm not tall enough.
Mute and stop video. All right, there we go. I'm gonna mute this.
All right. Good morning. Thanks for everyone's patience as we go through this. Just a couple questions in the beginning. I see, I'm always trying to get an idea of who's on the call or not. And I'm sorry that I set up here in the patio and somebody started cutting down a tree down here. So is that bothering anybody's hearing, or can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, fantastic. Good morning, Chris.
Morning.
Does anybody have any questions with the contract as it stands right now with the standard contract 118? I'm going to take that as a no.
Yeah, I don't have anything specific right now. I think we're
Not a problem. Okay, because I know that some of the issues that we're having is obviously, and we've talked about this in the past, is the home inspection paragraph. Because there's really, after those 5 days, when the home inspection is delivered, the seller has 5 days to respond, buyer has 5 days to respond. And if you look at that paragraph and kind of break it down, there's no ending date. So you have to actually develop one. So if you do an addendum with any changes that are agreed to between buyer and seller, you should put some language in there that is understood and agreed that the contract is in standing and the home inspection period is concluded. Does that make sense to everybody that's on this call? Because I don't know, Tony, are you a newer agent? I'm not familiar with you.
I'm actually Valerie Presley's Director of Operations.
Okay.
I just came on about a month ago. I did hold my license way back in like 2005. So a lot of it's familiar. I've just got to refresh myself on everything.
Yeah, if it's 2005, you're going to find that it's a whole new contract, which is not bad. And you are more than welcome to call me, because Val has actually, placed herself in enough of these meetings to, come away with some positive information to utilize in her contract. So you're more than welcome to call me on the outside of this meeting if you have any questions moving forward whenever you're doing a contract for Val and her team.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so you're welcome, and welcome aboard. I did see your name. That's why I mentioned, I thought you were newer, and then you were working with Val, but I just wanted to confirm that. So I wish you a lot of luck.
Thank you.
Very good. So realistically, what I would like to do with each one of these contract classes is not really drive down on the contract of sale it is, or for the utmost importance, but also the listing contract, because everything we do is a contract. And I want everyone to understand that, we need to be in compliance. We need to have these files accessible. So Trish or Brenda definitely need to know where they're going to be able to find these. They should be sent to her, or sent to them, I should say. So we have records of those. And why do we need those? We get calls from other brokers, okay? There might be a contractual question. There might be a question where the seller or buyer feel that that agent's not in compliance with their standards. These conversations come up. They're difficult to have. However, they're part of this business. And we just try to make everybody as happy as we possibly can, but also hold a stern line on the business side of it. And that's why it's important to have these contracts, have them executed, all right, fully signed, in position, making sure everybody gets copies of them. Some of the larger complaints that we get is agents don't share copies with their buyers or sellers, and it's kind of hard to believe, but it happens. You just get caught up with doing it electronically. You're on DocuSign, or if you're still using Dotloop, or you're just moving them around somehow on a PDF. You must make sure that everyone gets a copy of what they have, and that's a large question that comes up with a lot of buyers and sellers. I don't have a copy. I don't know my end date. And if you don't have copies, you should make sure you do, either in a hard form or in a PDF, because they will be asked for not only by the buyer or seller, but if it's also contested with the board and or the real estate commission, they're going to ask for copies. And when I mean copies is, what was presented? Was there an offer? Was it in writing? Was it a PDF? Was it a fax? Was it a text? You know, all these forms of acknowledgement or way of having everybody move forward in a transaction is to have a meeting of the minds. But more importantly is to make sure that what you've said is in writing someplace. Okay. Biggest question I get periodically, doesn't, you know, do all offers have to be in writing? No, they could be verbal. And the agents that don't accept the verbal, you know, let us know. And then what we'll pretty much do at that point is let the agent know, and they're the broker, that any and all offers must be presented to the seller. So you can't arbitrarily make a decision that you're not going to present a verbal offer to your seller, because you will be, you know, you can put yourself in a position to be fined. Okay. Any questions with that? You guys are going to
Actually,
make
Mike, I have a quick question with that. So from a compliance standpoint with the verbal offer,
Yep.
so if we're adding, like, say in command, we're updating our file, how do we go ahead and document that it's a verbal proposal? Do we still need to get something in writing, or?
Yeah. You can create a text or an email to yourself. Just say, just
Okay.
received a call from Joe from wherever. Just wants me to submit a verbal offer to my seller at XYZ Real Street. So much down, settlement date. That way, what did you just do? You created a note. You created the documentation to move forward. So I just don't, you know, I get that answer a lot, Chris, quite frankly, where they come up and say they don't want to present a verbal offer. They're compelled to. I mean, they really are. And it's a real issue, because again, we have buyers agents or sellers agents making decisions for buyers and sellers. And we're not part of the transactions. We're part of the instrument of putting together part of the monetary end at the end when we're compensated. But the contracts between two people, buyer and seller, right? So we have to make sure of that. I mean, we're in the background of that, no question about it. But we're not making those decisions. We're letting buyers and sellers do those. Okay, so just want to make sure everybody's clear. Everyone's clear on that, I should say. Furthermore, our affiliates, we want to make sure that we are making sure that we have compliance. We have our affiliated documentation forms filled out, our entities, YHT, the mortgage companies, etc. More importantly, always make sure you have dual disclosure at all times. I mean, I can't imagine anybody in this group who's not doing a possible dual disclosure. So you must have that form executed and delivered to that seller, that you are acting as a potential buyer's agent and or seller's agent and or both. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
I'm going to say that's a yes, right? Is anybody in a transaction right now where they're having some difficulty with moving through or navigating past the home inspection? That's a no. This is an easy group. I don't know. This could be a short meeting. And I'm sorry that I'm doing this down here. My wife and I jumped down to Florida to see her 100-year-old aunt who's turning 101 in January. We wanted to make sure we saw her while the weather was pretty decent. So we just came down for 2 days and we're flying home today. But in fact, right after I got done this meeting, we'll head to the airport. Question I have for you all is, when you're moving through these contracts and you're negotiating, are we making notations about the negotiations as they've gone forward? In other words, once there's a seller's disclosure, once it's reviewed, once there's a home inspection, that's reviewed. Are we making any professional, decisions on how to assist somebody through that navigation to make sure that they're asking for the right articles? And I'd like to know if somebody can give me some input as far as how they move that through. In other words, say you do the sale, everybody's happy, you do the home inspection, there's some issues. Buyer asks the agent, hey, could you let me know what you think I need to be asking for? How do you guys typically respond to that, if I may ask? Anybody can go forward, as long as you unmute yourself. Jason? Anybody in your group with that question?
Typically, we focus on what's the major concern. Ask the client what you're out of this report. They're overwhelming. So you're trying not to worry about the small stuff. What's the major issues of the home? What's going to be the highest value of price if you walk into this place that you're going to be responsible for if you don't ask for that repair to be made. So really, I just go
Right. No, it's a good approach.
understand the
I mean, what
best
Jason's
details.
pretty much saying is exactly what he's, most of the home inspections that you use, using an engineer, using a home inspection group, they have a format and they'll give you the highlighted items of major concerns. So once you evaluate those major concerns, what I'm trying to make sure that you understand, and or you know, when you're conveying this to your buyers, are pick out the major points that are what's going to cost them the more reflection of monies going forward. In other words, the repair. Who's doing the repair? Are you going to have a qualified contractor do an estimate? That's kind of hard to do. As easy as it thinks, as easy as we all might think it is trying to get a reputable contractor out there to provide an estimate writing in advance. So that's kind of the background that you're going to be looking at. The disappointments that we don't want to lead ourselves into is leading that too much. So you really want some direction. You know, you want to give your seller some input or your buyer some input, but I think you also need to get some information from them. You know, what's their major concern? What can they do? What do they feel they want to manage? How do you feel that they're going to be if they don't get other things managed? Because keep in mind, you may have come out of a highest and best bid and there could have been 5 or 10 other buyers, quite frankly, and that could impact how you respond to the home inspection. Because one thing for certain, and I want to get somebody, Tony used to be in the business in 05. When the home inspection came over and the seller said, I'm not doing anything. How did that go back in 2005?
I mean, it just started more of negotiating about it.
Right.
You know, sitting down, talking to the seller, you know, if they were being unreasonable, just trying
Right.
to talk them through that, you know, this might not go through if we don't do this. And I, like you said, focus on the larger things. Let's get this and this done. And, you know, we'll talk to them and say, all right, you know, let these other things slide here.
Exactly. Chris, if I could get your input, what in today, 2021, what do most sellers want to do?
I mean, honestly, I feel like right now, and you know, like what we're kind of seeing, like I'm still seeing a lot of these deals where a lot of these sellers they don't want to do anything, like period.
That's the answer I was looking
Yeah.
for. Because that's a pretty much standard answer right now. I don't want to do a thing. And that's kind of hard when you're managing a buyer, because what are you looking for? They're looking for your allegiance. They want to make sure you're paying attention to them. They're looking for your concerns. And they're also looking for your input. So your input, as Jason said, is very important, and Chris as well, and Tony, because all the input's important. But now you got to figure out what's going to make your buyer feel that you're listening to them, you're asking for the items that they would wish that you ask for. So sometimes you just got to create that little wish list, send it over to the agent, say, listen, I really don't know what your seller's willing to do. These are the concerns of the buyer. Give me something in writing indicating a direction. Because what did you just do when I said that, and if you implement that in your business? You've given that request to that seller's agent. That seller's agent gets a response from the seller, and you've pushed back on being the bearer of bad news, but you're pushing the news forward. So you've conveyed your thoughts. You've asked for those things those items to be addressed, and the seller's responded, good, bad, or indifferent. So that way you kind of created a little bit of a buffer between yourself and that negotiation right there. Does that make sense to everybody?
Definitely.
No. So you're not let me do this because I see those. I mean, that's the way a lot of us used to be. Let me get this. Let me drive this. And I'm seeing transactions become more personal between the agents instead of the buyer and seller. And like I said earlier, the transactions buyer and seller. So let's keep that in perspective, is to keep the continuity of the transaction moving forward. You don't want to be that spoke in the wheel, like I got to get this for my buyer. I got to get this for my buyer. I hear that I all the time, and we got to take that out of the transaction because you need both of these parties to come together to make this deal happen. And sometimes doing that little extra step creates that buffer, creates the fact that, you know what, my agent's trying to do the best thing for me. The sellers just don't want to do it. So it's not like my agent doesn't want to do it, because if you keep pushing back and say, no, let's not ask for anything, let's not ask for anything. Now, all of a sudden, they think the only thing that's important to you is what? What's that one word? What was that?
The check.
The commission and the transaction. So I think that is, we need to make sure that everyone understands that we're working in everyone's best interest. Okay. Emily, you have anything going on right now? I see you're up on the call today. Good morning. I don't think Emily's still there. She might be on a remote call. Okay, move forward. Got a couple other things on housekeeping that I think is going to be important, especially with us moving into 2022. Believe it or not, it's hard to even say, right? Is there anything that we see differently in the market as far as how you're handling your business on your listings? Are you taking longer terms or shorter terms? I don't know about you guys from TCS. Or Chris's group. I mean, you guys doing long? You still doing 90 or 120-day contracts?
Yeah, it looks like we are still doing those. Yeah, got a
Yeah, I
couple,
think
not too many.
Yeah, I think if the house is priced well, I mean, I'm seeing some where I know if I'm over a little bit, I might extend the time period, but kind of keep it maybe 4 months versus 2 or 3. Where, you know, before, if you had it priced right and you did a 30 or 60-day closing or term, you would pretty much be successful. But I'm starting to see, and I'm sure you guys are, both of you groups are very active in the field. I think we're starting to see some of these homes coming on the market with new agents at different prices. So they put that one out there in left field, want to see if anyone swings at it. And now they're starting to center themselves to be realistic. Are you guys seeing a similar pattern in the marketplace?
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, and the appraisals still, I mean, they're starting to come back, especially with some of the newer agents. And Tony, I mean, I know Val's pretty good about it as well, but when you price them a little bit out there and you're really out there, I think my personal feeling is you're setting yourself a little up for a disaster, because there's a margin for the appraisal, but I think that wish list, if you're like 20 or 30 or 40 more out than the market is showing today, I think that you might be setting yourself up for a default, because sooner or later, the appraisers if they feel the market's jump, and they start seeing it slide, they're going to be sliding as well. So they're going to be making their market corrections, saying, I don't see it flying at 3 or 4 or 5% a month. I see it maybe declining or staying on average, or par, or maybe even sliding down. So the bigger houses definitely are sliding down. We're seeing those sitting around, I think, a little bit longer, unless they're just exceptional houses and there's just so many improvements. It's just like a no-brainer, and they're out there. I mean, and some of the people on the teams have them, and I mean, they sell because they're just, you can't repeat some of the work that they put in it. As you start looking at breaking down what it costs, when you see a $250,000 or $500,000 pool, are you going to get that today? No. Are you going to get all that on an appraisal? Believe it or not, a pool comes in on average, they might give a return of 25,000, no more than 50 on some of these $500,000 pools, which is kind of crazy to understand, but that's how the appraiser's doing it. You look at, I'm sure that Jason and Chris look at some of these appraisals when they come in the office. Do you kind of see on average about a 25,000 for a pool, if that?
Yeah, just about. Yeah.
If about, you're right. And the other thing is, I mean, the only thing that's changed it's interesting because I've watched it, my 35 plus years, I watched it change where, a pool was, always, you lost 8% of the, 80% of the buyers. So it's 8 out of 10 don't want the pool, 2 do. But in a COVID market, or coming out of a COVID market, now all of a sudden the home pool is that much more important because it gives you all the reasons to even stay home for longer. Mm-hmm. So, that's changed around the appraising world, especially with how that concept is. And now there's a little bit more value, but I'm not seeing it reflected in the appraisals that I see when they come across my desk when they're a problem. So that's just something to put in the back of your mind when you go to an exceptional house that has a wow pool, and listen, you start doing any landscaping, any hardscaping, patio work, and whether concrete or not, it all adds up really quickly, and they just don't get that back. The other part of this, when we negotiate these exceptional houses is, somebody puts in a new kitchen, somebody puts in granite, somebody puts in a new roof, put a 50-year roof out. Do you get all those numbers back? Like we had one of the agents in Medford and had to go sit with the seller, for an hour. And she goes, this is what I've done to the house and I want all this money back. And I said, well, listen, when somebody comes and appraises it, they look at the kitchen, they'll give you some minor improvements, but they're not going to say, I just spent 10 grand for my granite. I just spent, 30, 40, 50,000 for my new cabinetry. They're not going to give you that plus 80, just using some raw numbers. It's not going to happen. Kitchen's a kitchen, bath's a bath. Are there exceptions? Yeah, there are, because sometimes people might put a little bit more, but you won't see corrections in the thousands. You might see it $1,000 or $1,500 in roofs, a 30-year versus a 50. You're not seeing like, oh, well, I'm going to give you $1,000 or $2,000 extra for a roof. So those are the conversations we should be having with you should be having with your sellers, so they kind of understand from out of the gate that when you set yourself up for a really high exceptional number, there could be some pushback on the price, and that way it's not a shocker to them. Like all of a sudden it comes in under. We had one last, I guess 2 weeks ago, 80 grand under. It's a lot of margin. And I said this in the meeting. I don't know if some of you are out there, and some of these contracts come in and we're doing these transactions and buyers are giving up the appraisal. Okay. Not a bad item to give up, right? In a seller's market. And they're giving up the home inspections. They're just doing it for principal purposes, just for not their own knowledge. Okay. Now what does that do? Because you got to think of down the road. Okay. Now the people go in, they buy the house, they do the contract, and they came in, they said they have sufficient assets to close if it doesn't appraise. You have to ask yourself, because I asked this one agent and they didn't do this. I said, did you get a sufficient asset letter or verification that they have the additional assets? Because if you're doing a 3% or 5% contract, what are the chances of you having an extra $30, $40, or $50,000 laying around if it doesn't appraise? And are you prepared to delete your entire savings to make up that difference for the transaction to go forward? Because your seller is going to hope that you made that decision and you did that investigation to protect their best interest. And if they didn't, you could be culpable for not doing that paperwork or that extra step. Does that make sense to everybody? So what I'm saying?
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, how many people say they have it and then all of a sudden like, hey, I don't have 80, I don't have 60. And then all of a sudden you're folding up. And I don't know, Jason, because I'm picking on you guys because you guys are, have larger teams. How many, we've always had this. In fact, I had this conversation with Nunnekamp the other day, or last week when I was in the office. You never see the buyers in a bidding war come back. Once they're discarded, the chances of them coming back are so remote. You guys agree?
I agree.
Yeah,
you just
100%.
I'm sorry, Jason.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Once you discard them, they're gone.
Yeah, it's like they got a bad hand of cards. It's an omen. Oh, I'm glad it happened. Like they don't come back and say, hey, listen, we're only 20 grand away or 10 grand away or 5 grand away. They just don't come back. They put that house out there and it's gone. So really when you're on the selection team, the seller's agent, you really have to make sure you do your due diligence. Make sure you take those extra steps to secure the right buyer. Because I know typically a lot of these agents, they'll say and do anything in the beginning, and then once they're in the deal and they get the contract signed, you start seeing little terms changing. Well, we're going to put down. We're not going to put down 5%. We're going to put down 3.5%. We're going to do it FHA. I mean, those those questions, I think you really got to do a better, I think we all have to do a better job on making sure we select the right buyer. I hope that all makes sense to everybody. I don't want to, there's not enough people on the call to get too crazy about it, but I think that hurts us sometimes when we try and, put these transactions together. The other thing is, when you say making sure they have the money, I mean, you can ask them. It's not illegal to ask them to prove that they have the assets, where that's coming from. I mean, it's all part of the loan negotiation. So if somebody has an extra 40 or 50, I mean, they might want to keep their reserve, which is a great answer, to do the improvements after they move in. I get that. But one thing you should consider, are you making all these decisions with a $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 escrow buyer? I don't think so. I think we all got to work on, when you have $2,000 or $3,000 in a transaction, some people might say, hey, listen, keep my money. It's just, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to take 30 grand out of pocket. You can take my, I'll take a chance on you trying to sell the house to somebody else. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Yeah, good deal. Okay, the other thing is, there's really no changes with the contract right now. So the contract stays still. I haven't heard of anything from NAR reflecting the fact that we're going to have additional changes. I mean, I think that couple housekeeping items I'd like to see, like, when we truly have an as-is contract, make sure you you sign those addendums as is and have buyer seller sign them. Okay, because that is really important, because I mean, we have a class action going, or that's not a class action, it's going to be a lawsuit. Buyer came in, okay, did not want to do a home inspection because she knew the seller just came out of another transaction and was not doing a thing to the house. Bought the house as is, signed an as is contract, and you know that we're now 6 months later, fast forward, just starting a lawsuit because she felt that what was in the previous buyer's contract should have been told to her, and it wasn't, because the agent never received a buyer's home inspection report. It was never delivered to the seller's agent. So the seller's agent didn't share it because it was not delivered, but the buyer is going to contest it because everyone should have told her what was wrong with the house when she knew there were items wrong with the house and the house was being sold as is, and she signed an as is contract. So it should be interesting. I'll try and give everyone the answer, how that concludes over the next year or whatever it's going to be with going forward with this nonsense. But that's the stuff, what happens in these deals. People get caught up in the rat race. They get caught up with making their best and final deal, or don't willing to do anything. And then all of a sudden that word amnesia comes into place. I should have never done this. Even though you have in writing, you're not doing a home inspection, you're not doing what's asked of you, and you want to just buy the house regardless of that fact.
Mike?
Yes, Tony.
So you're saying, like, you've got the buyer, she says, all right, I know the seller's not going to do anything from the previous deal that fell through. I'm going to buy the house as is.
Correct.
You as the agent should really say, well, hey, let me go get you a copy of that home inspection report so you know what you're getting into.
Well, that's where it gets a little gray, Tony, because say some of us say, okay, I got a buyer, they're interested in a house, they want to go forward. I call up the seller's agent. Hey, do you have the previous buyer's home inspection? Can that be shared? They'll have to go back to the buyer and say, you're going to give me a copy to share. Will you release that to the seller? The seller says, yeah, I'll take a copy of it. And the seller pushes that forward to the new buyer. If there's anything that home inspector, and if anyone's doing multiple business transactions, you kind of know each inspector has their own niche. They're either an electrician or a carpenter, they were a roofer at one point, they did some kind of installation. So whatever their hot button was, where they usually focus all their energy on with the reports, and I'm sure people in production will agree. So you really have to give that with care. So in other words, if you do get it, they do share it, you have to give that to them with a letter and have them sign off on it, that the sellers are releasing the previous buyer's home inspection report. However, we are highly suggesting that you do your own home inspection in the event that anything was missed during that inspection, because everybody sees something differently. I see black, I see white, I see gray, I see, whatever. everyone sees a report differently or sees the outcome of the house. Does that make sense, Tony?
Oh, absolutely, because I remember when working with home inspectors, it depended on who like you said, if
Oh.
they were a roofing guy, they focused there, you know.
You could
So-
always see they were a rafter person. That guy didn't do this right, that guy, and if it's electrician, he didn't, he took a shortcut here, plumber, they took a shortcut there.
Yep.
And that's just the way they are. And you could always tell. And, that's why I kind of stick to just having engineers do my home inspections, because that way they have a general understanding as far as the components of a property, and they're not going to be, focused on one particular area instead of the whole house. So, so that becomes important for me with me moving forward. But I think that everybody's on that same page. Just make sure that you want to have as much signed as possible. As is, should always be signed. The other one, in fact, one of the agents called up about 8:30 this morning. Got a house, seller's been renting it out for the last 7 years. And the answer, they wanted to know if they needed to do a seller's disclosure. And my answer was yes, because even though you own a property and you've had renters in there for 5 or 10 years, well, one thing, if you're a registered landlord, is the townships want you to understand that you're responsible for that property 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So you should be involved with knowing what's going on in the property, age of the hot water heater, HVAC system, roof, etc. So my answer to her was yes, fill out a seller's disclosure, but then also put in the property, the homeowner, or the homeowner has not lived in the property for the last 7 years. So there's a little bit of a buffer disclosure that it's been rented out, but it still doesn't relieve you of your responsibilities to the property, even though you're around. And I think a lot of people are trying to say that. Now in the state, you should definitely have a seller's disclosure. And if it's an exorcist or executor, they have never occupied the property. Okay. And that should you could still include it in the contract and just write under, in bold, the executor or executress has never occupied the property. And you have them sign off, and most attorneys will let you do that anyway, because it's just keeping in compliance with today's standard. And that is to have a home inspection, or I'm sorry, to have a seller's disclosure, which the state asks you. And in addition to that, let's get that out of my mind. The state asks you, and the seller's going to ask you who's ever on the real estate commission, if there's ever been, and the insurance company, if there's been a seller's disclosure. Chris, did you have a question?
No, I was good. Sorry, the door opened. I forgot to mute myself.
Not a problem. Not a problem. I'm going to ask if there's any questions. It's a small group here. If there's any additional questions, and then we'll end a little bit earlier. And then I'm always open, as I think all of you know, for any and all questions, whether what day it is or what time it is. So I don't really care if it's a Sunday or a Monday. So feel free to call me, and I'll give you the best answer we could possibly give you for that question. Any questions by anybody?
No, I'm actually good.
Good deal. I think that we'll end it early, and I appreciate you letting me do this from here, because I wanted to make sure we continued having this contract class, even though I was away for just a few days. But I wanted to make sure that we, everyone knew that we're here, and make some changes internally at the office, and things will only get better. All right.
Thanks,
So,
Mike.
any other questions, feel free to give me a shot, and I appreciate you all taking your time, and we'll conclude a little bit early. Tony, good luck with Val. You're going to have fun with her. She's going to keep you on your toes, or you keep her on her toes.
I know she will. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everybody. I'll see you in the office over the next day or so.
All right, see you, Mike.
Bye-bye now. Have a great one. Bye now.